Alexandra Stein, we've spoken before, you've been on Talk Beliefs. Can you tell us what your job description is, if you like?
That's always a good question. I'm a social psychologist and I specialize in the area of cults, totalitarianism and brainwashing. And I teach occasionally, currently at Mary Ward Centre in Bloomsbury. I do some post-cult recovery counselling, and I speak and go to I get invites to various interesting things to try to help people understand the mechanics of how these kinds of things work.
Well, that's great, because we were saying earlier that this subject of cults is sort of having a resurgence of interest at the moment, largely through things like The Handmaid's Tale, which is, of course, is a drama, but also Leah Remini, Scientology in the Aftermath, which is about an ex-cult member, that being Leah Remini, who's speaking out against it. And so you're seeing a lot, like I said, a big resurgence of interest in that.
Mm-hmm. I am, and also I want to say people like your and my and others like us, our work as well, because there's a kind of groundswell of what you might call more grassroots activism. A lot of the people are being active around the abusers and Jehovah's Witnesses, for instance. A lot of sort of unnamed people putting their experiences online. So that a lot of people who were born or brought up in cults and also in totalitarian systems like North Korea, who get out of those systems and then are writing about their experiences and speaking about them and so forth. So I think there's a whole number of things that are all kind of coming together at this time and making people more aware of this phenomena.
So do you think if people look in the newspaper and they see what's going on with the Charity Commission, with the Exclusive Brethren, the Jehovah's Witnesses, with the pedophilia, that they think, oh, I don't know anything about these people. I know they knock on my door. Let's look it up. Let's see what they're about. And people are becoming more aware.
I think so. I mean, for instance, Rebecca Stott, who's quite a well-known author, just published a book about her own growing up in the Exclusive Brethren, now that you mention them. And, that got a lot of press. And it wasn't a lot of detail in a way about how these things work. That's more the kind of writing I do. But it was read by a lot of people and it got featured in, The Guardian and Elle magazine and all kinds of other media. So all of these things start to add up, and I think people start, they see someone else has told their story. That gives them the courage, because usually it does take courage to tell these stories, to then tell their own. So there's a kind of snowball effect, I think, that's been happening. And I'm very encouraged by it. I mean, I think we have a long way to go, but I think we're going in the right direction. And
do you think they look at stories like that and then apply it to things they see on the news, like North Korea, and even Trump and his base, which is, I suppose, a cult of a sort?
It certainly looks very cultic to me. I don't know how. I think it depends on who you're talking about. The they is a sweeping statement. But I think many people are starting to look at things through that lens. Clearly with Trump. I mean, when I taught 2 years ago at my Mary Ward class, before I ever mentioned him, even though I certainly saw in him the characteristics of a cult leader very clearly, namely the combination of charisma and also authoritarianism, so that kind of charismatic bully thing that we see in cult leaders, which Trump has par excellence.
And narcissism and lies.
Indeed, those two. And so my students, before I even mentioned it, were every week saying, isn't this like Trump? Isn't this like Trump? So I do think many people are trying to understand what's happening in the States, and that seems to be one useful analytical frame. And it's pretty terrifying.
And so perhaps they're thinking, I should know the warning signs. I should know what to look for. And I know that you deal in prevention. So do you think that perhaps people becoming more aware, this is a good thing, in that people will go, hang on, my daughter says that she went to this yoga class, and I know from my little bit of research that the warning signs are there.
Well, I guess my concern, I hope that's happening. I think that's where we've got a long way to go. I would like every school child and university student to be taught this stuff, but we're really not there. So I think that has not been disseminated very much. I think that work is very much still to come.
Have you ever had students come to you and say, I'm doing a dissertation on cults, I saw you online? And
Yes, many, actually. Many have seen the videos you took of me. So thank you for that.
Oh, that's
and
my pleasure.
From there, on their behalf, thank you, because, you know, I like to think they're getting useful information. But
well, to keep them out of cults, if anything.
Well, yeah, so I mean, I do think that's the other thing. I mean, I was talking to you earlier. When I got out of the cult I was in now 27 years ago.
This was ago. Wasn't it? It was a leftist
It was a
political
leftist cult. You know, that was before the internet, really, and I had to get things coming to me by snail mail saying, here is what a cult looks like. Now, you know, people can just go online and Google cults and, you know, they'll get some bad information, but there's now a lot of good information. So that, I think, has also made a big impact, is that it's much easier to find out now.
And we're seeing it in dramas as well. We mentioned The Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah.
There was The Path, which was kind of modeled on Scientology crossed with Jonestown. And we had Waco recently as well. Okay, people are looking at it as kind of a sensationalist form of entertainment, but it's also a good way of getting the information out, isn't it?
I think you get a certain amount out. I don't think it's good enough, because I think if you only see the phenomena but you don't have a kind of analytical frame, that it's not good enough. So, I mean, an example might be, I mean, I often talk about infectious disease, which some people disagree with, but I talk about the HIV/AIDS epidemic. If all you see is the symptoms, you can go, oh, that's a horrible disease, I don't want it. But once people learn how it's transmitted and how to prevent transmission, now they have agency to help them do that. And many people then do that. Not everybody, but many people. So I think it's the same. If all we do is tell the stories, they're powerful and they're important, but you also need to say, be careful if any person or group tries to isolate you from your family and friends, tries to engulf you in their own world entirely. So it doesn't have to be their personality is weak and needy and vulnerable, but they may have just had a breakup of a relationship, or they may have just moved, or they may have had a bereavement. You know, they've got something has slight shift, a normal life shift, where they may be open to some new networks or ideas. Right. And even then it doesn't have to be that. They may just go to a yoga class and by misfortune end up getting sucked into a yoga cult.
Even more subtle.
Of which there are many. And there's good work being done by some survivors of some pretty horrible yoga cults. That good work is being done right now by them exposing this. So I think if it's too easy, the reason I kind of stopped you on that, because people's natural reaction, it's a very human thing when we see something as disturbing as people being in a cult, is to say, that's really terrible, I feel really bad for that person. Phew, it could never happen to me.
Yes.
Because I'm all right. I would know what it looks like. But you may not know it if it comes under a guise that you're not expecting.
That's interesting.
You know, like, I knew what cults were when I lived in California. I didn't expect it to come in the guise of a left-wing group, right? I had no knowledge that they could be that.
As people in a yoga class now might even be chatting amongst themselves about that awful cult they heard about in the news, not realizing they're actually in one.
And I would say to anyone listening, you know, anything really can be a cult. The question is, are they starting to tell you in a gradual way, oh, you know, yoga's great to come once a week and twice a week. Maybe you should come more often. Maybe you should come 4 times a week. Yeah. Maybe you should also really improve your practice by coming 4 times a week and on the weekend, because that's really how you progress.
And then suddenly there's a photograph of the guru at the top of the...
Exactly. And by the way, your family aren't really going to understand, because they're not quite as developed as you are in their desire to improve themselves. You know, so it is a subtle process. People wouldn't fall for it otherwise.
Do they have to get more subtle as people become more aware of what constitutes a cult?
That's an interesting question. I don't know.
Because if they are morphing, as you say,
yeah.
like I wouldn't have thought a yoga class would be a cult.
Well,
So perhaps the instigators of the cult, I have to do this a bit differently. I can't be like the Jehovah's Witnesses of old,
right. And also, I think a lot of them now do what you also had mentioned previously about visiting Scientology, and they said,
yes,
people say bad things about us, but we're not a cult. I think quite a lot of groups now, if you go on their websites, may have in their frequently asked questions, but aren't you a cult?
Yes.
No, we're not a cult. And I would say pretty much, 99%.
If you have a leaflet saying, "Are we a cult?" You probably are.
I was going to say most bona fide organizations don't feel the need to disclaim that.
I know of a couple that actually have the pamphlets.
Yeah. So, but also we need to be able to identify ourselves. A group that doesn't, that claims to have the only answer. You don't need any other answers. They claim some larger than life result. Heaven or perfection or total transformation or a perfect world or any of these perfect things. The world isn't perfect, so
be wary of the P word.
Of the P word. And be wary of the T word, the transform word. A lot of cults use that word.
Yes.
And I think that's very suspect because I think it's fine to change, but to transform yourself
and transcend as well
implies that you aren't, everything about you is wrong, and you have to be transformed completely, and that gives someone else a lot of power over you. Really
Christianity has done that for 2,000 years with "you're born sinless."
There you go.
By default.
So watch out for the P and the T words. And again, anything whether it's slow or fast, that tries to isolate you and enclose you in its own world, these are not healthy systems. We want to be an open, flexible system, something that has a great goal, but also allows you to have many other involvements and thoughts, allows you to ask questions.
And what would you say to those people who say, well, all religions are cult, Catholicism is a cult? I hear that a lot.
I hear that a lot too, and this is why I'm not a big Dawkins fan. I know he's helpful to a lot of people who've been oppressed by religion, so I honour that, and I think some of his books have been great. But the fundamentalist atheists I find a bit troublesome. And I mention this in my book, I think in chapter 1, because I think they conflate religion and cults. And I don't think that works, because not all religions are cults, and not all cults are religions. So
you don't get, for instance, sleep deprivation coming from the Catholic Church.
Right.
Yeah.
And you don't actually get separated from your family.
There can be aspects of it.
Aspects, but it's not a systematic
yeah.
thing. I don't think if I was tomorrow to join the Catholic Church, which is a marvellous idea, maybe I'll try it. They're not going to say to me, stop seeing my children or my mother. That is just not what they're going to do.
Or to sleep with the...
or tell me who to sleep with.
Yeah.
Which my cult did tell me. So I know of what I speak. On the subject of religious cults, though, just shifting, there is one, UCKG, I think it's called. Yes, or is it UCKG? And they have a huge place in Finsbury Park that used to be a theatre, I think. It's rather beautiful. I went in there the other day. It's one of these beautiful old kind of, it's not exactly Art Deco, but sort of like that building.
I'm going to check that out.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And they also have a smaller, but I think big population attending down in Brixton. And it's mostly targeting people of Afro-Caribbean descent. And I knew they were a cult because I was getting some of their literature through my door, and it's sort of marvellous because it's this kind of newspaper, and it's basically all just pictures of people with really big smiles, like really big faces with really big smiles, and there's not actually hardly any content in there. Yeah. It's just like UKCG, and then big smiley person, and then UKCG and other big smiley person.
Preamble to love bombing.
Yeah. So I went in there, and then it turned out one of my students this term knew about them and told me what I didn't know, which is they're actually from Brazil. So, you get all this international travel of these big cults. And she had an uncle who was in it. So she knew all about it and knew how ugly it was. Yeah.
Gosh.
So just saying, here in the central London, this is not a small church. Oh, and when I went to visit it in Finsbury Park, and I was with a friend, and we went in and we got, immediately this young woman, very well-dressed, attractive woman, came and chit-chatted to us. Anyway, we went out again, and there was this huge open-top bus filled with young people, school-aged people, all kind of doing rah-rah, and they were all going around on this bus propagandizing for this church.
Yeah.
So they're very visible and have a lot of money, powerful, big Brazilian
And this is an
church.
up-and-coming thing to watch out for.
Yeah. And they're part of what I think is a bit of an epidemic in the UK right now, which is these kind of Pentecostal, happy-clappy churches.
I remember you mentioning that at your last talk.
Yeah.
Yes, because I've seen that a lot in Watford where I live.
Yeah.
They will rent out a room in a larger church, like in a Baptist church, and they'll close themselves off, and I've been in these places and I will hear them, and it sounds so bizarre what's coming out through these doors. This isn't, if the Baptist church knew what was going on in there, would they allow them in there?
Yeah. And again, it's not, some of them have lovely music. There's a lovely little video documentary some students made that I was looking at recently, where I was interviewed. Some of the music's great. I love those old gospel songs. I'm a sucker for all that. So it can seem very attractive, and and there's a kind of love bombing feel to it. But when you actually start hearing the stories, I may have told the story before, but this one young woman who ended up in Lagos in a dorm where she didn't really see daylight for 6 months because they never were allowed to open the curtains. And she was an attractive young woman, and it was a great privilege that she was allowed to go to the leader's room at lunchtime and eat the leftover grains of rice from his plate. We can imagine where this might be going.
Yes, I can imagine.
This is not just a religion. This is a cultic religion, or a cult dressed up as a religion. So I think you can have benign religions. I fully believe that, even though I don't have a religious bone in my body, and I'd be happy if there weren't any religions anymore. But there are, and some people find it, they're a social place for people.
Is the advice, do your research?
Do your research. Know the warning signs of cults. You can go to my website and see them.
Question everything.
A question. Anyone who, people can contact me on my website if they have a question, and I'll chat to them about, is this a healthy group or not? And if it's an all-consuming group that's saying, for the revolution you have to give your all, well, yes, but not all. You shouldn't have to give your all. You maybe can give, some large percentage, but you should have areas of autonomy left in your life. And anyone who's telling you different, I can guarantee they're doing that for their own purposes, not for the larger, grandiose purposes that they claim.
And you are just being used.
Exactly. Yeah. Exploited and abused. That will be a group that will end up abusing you. So,
Excellent. Yeah. Okay, Alexandra, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.